Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LCS week number 5 overview and analysis video. I am very excited to get into this. We are really back into the swing of things, and believe it or not, we're really getting close to the end of the regular season for the LCS. I know it doesn't really feel like these teams have played a ton of games, and especially because we had that giant break in the middle, it really feels like these teams are just starting to find their footing, but we're getting closer and closer to playoffs. Only 2 weeks remain after the end of week number 5, and so we're going to have a pretty good idea of where teams end up lying by the end of this video. If you are interested in my coverage of all of the other weeks of the LCS up until this point, check out the playlist up in the iCard right now. That's going to be every single week done in the same format as this video here. But I really don't want to waste you guys' time too much at the beginning of this video. We've got some interesting things to get into in the video proper, and so I don't want this intro to be crazy long. Let's get right into the analysis. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will, of course, also be updating my personal power rankings from number 1 to number 8 here in the LCS to kind of give you an idea of whether or not I think teams are moving up or down in terms of their trajectory. So without further ado, let's get into the analysis. Let's get into the games themselves, and that means starting off with day number 1, and a pretty predictable outcome here on day 1 is we saw Cloud9 taking on NRG, and Cloud9 picking up the very dominant 2-0 series win. This was not close really under any circumstances. Cloud9 was better in both games by a considerable margin. Game 2 was even more dominant than game number 1, and I continue to very much be on the Cloud9 bandwagon. I know that 5-0, 10-1 looks really good, but there are a lot of people that are just not quite as enthused about this team, and there are reasons for that. They have yet to play the other 2 good teams in the LCS. They're going to be the final 2 matchups for them in the regular season, and we'll talk about that at the end of the week in terms of where I think Cloud9 ends up standing overall in terms of their perception in the league. But this team just continues to dominate the teams that they are supposed to dominate, and not everybody in the league has been able to do that over the course of this split, and so it's been impressive for Cloud9 to be able to stay on top, and no matter what happens this week, they are going to stay alone at number 1 in the standings, going 2-0 in this series, and so you've got to be impressed with that. For NRG, it's just been a bit of a disaster of a split. I think expectations were kind of low already coming into the split. I don't think people expected this team to compete for top 3 or top 4, really anything in that sphere, but even then, sitting at 2 and 3, sitting at 5 and 6, like, this is not all the worst thing in the world. I know this feels like a disaster. I know it feels like this team is completely dead in the water, but you have to remember there is a real shot that they are potentially walking out of this week in 4th or 5th place. Like, 2 wins is probably enough to get you into the upper half of the standings and to get you into the playoffs, at least at the current moment. And so NRG is not in as bad of a position as I think a lot of people are making them out to be. But we'll talk about Cloud9 here. Player of the series is going to go to Berserker. I did not have to think very hard about this one. Berserker was awesome on Ezreal in both of these games. Specifically, though, in Game 2, he was donated 3 kills essentially before 5 minutes into the game. He comes back with a tear, with a sheen, and all of a sudden this game is over. Ezreal is just able to completely run things from that point onwards. It was really fun to watch, and we've been kind of waiting for Berserker to re-break out for Cloud9. 2024 has certainly not been the same kind of year that he had last year in 2023. He was, pretty much the unanimous MVP for most people. The guy was dominating a lot of the games that they were playing. It was him versus Prince for a lot of the spring split, and then in summer, he was just kind of running away with things. He was dominant for, C9, and, maybe the consistency trailed off a bit at the end, but it's been 2024 that's been more of the sophomore slump, the down year, if you will, and I think that's been reflective in the results of Cloud9 just in general when you look back at the spring, but him and Vulcan are finally starting to get on the same page. They are finally starting to really come together and make something happen as a duo. Vulcan has also played a lot better over the second half here. He got player of the week last week for me. He was awesome in week number 4, and he was great in this series as well. The Bard in particular in game 2, he was everywhere on the map, constantly roaming, constantly creating macro problems for NRG after they threw away a lot of their tempo in the early game. That's massive from Vulcan. It really feels like he's starting to get back into his comfort zone with Cloud9, which is massive, but Berserker is the one carry that they're going to need to step up in order for this team to be the consistent, title threat that we know that they can be. If Berserker is playing really well, Vulcan is playing really well, you were already getting good performances out of jungle mid. We'll talk about mid lane in a second. It's maybe not been as good for JoJo as it was in the spring split, but that's almost an indictment on just the rest of the team being better and him getting less resources resources. I think it's a good thing overall, but if you're getting all of this for Cloud9 and you're putting that all in a package, like, they can beat Team Liquid for sure with that kind of recipe, and it's really going to be up to the bot lane in my opinion. But we did say it kind of there. JoJo has been a little bit more flippy, I would say, this split than he was last split. For the most part, those aggressive plays were always there. He was always going to be willing to trade 1-for-1. He's always been the type of player that is sometimes just going to get caught out of position. He kind of reminds me of Humanoid in that respect. I think he is slightly more consistent than someone like Humanoid, but there haven't really been as many pop-off, like, major plays for Cloud9. I would honestly argue, though, that that's not as bad of a thing as people are making it out to be. I do think JoJo has generally been fine over the course of this split. Above average, I think, especially in lane, he still shows a lot of the dominance that he has shown over the course of his career. He just doesn't need a lot of the resources that he's been getting in order to just completely destroy games. This is really the first time in his career that he's not been the #1 option on an LCS team, and so it's really been interesting to watch, but I think he's adapted to his role better than people are giving him credit for. Thanatos has also been getting better and better series over series. I thought he was really good here. Blabber was pretty solid. He's been very good this split. You know, Cloud9 just looks great. 5-0, 10-1. It's a great record. There is concern, just again, because they've not played any of the other top 2 teams, but they've gotten everything that they needed to get done against the bottom teams. They have beaten them handily, and they've not really looked pressed in any of those circumstances, even as much as some of the other top tier teams. So that's nice. And then for Energy, really not a lot for me to say here. I do think there is a lot of results-based analysis going on for Energy. I've been seeing a lot of, oh, well, clearly Ignar was the one who was the glue to put this team together. You know, I talk about this a lot, but results-based thinking, I think, is one of the first ways to incorrectly assess the problems or the successes of a team in League of Legends. I think it's very clear to me that Huhi and FBI are not the problem on this team. This team just has major issues in terms of controlling their own playstyle, and they are very much in their own head. First of all, I don't think this meta fits them all that well. Contracts still feels like he has to play a ton of Maokai and Vi, and trust me, I think Maokai's really good. I think Maokai and Sejuani in particular, is mega undervalued at the LCS level. We're seeing it in every other region. Sejuani is probably the best jungler in the game right now, and everybody in the LCS is just kind of ignoring it. You know, I'll bring this up very quickly. I think the LCS is very clearly just behind the rest of the world in terms of adapting to the meta. We'll talk about some of the teams that do actually have a good read at the moment, but so many LCS teams, I think, are just like off the ball, and I think it's going to hurt them when it comes to the World Championships. That's just my prediction. But Contracts, you know, still pulling out things like the Vi and trying to make it work here. It's just not great. Like, he needs to be able to pick up things that can be a little bit more team fight oriented and can actually succeed in the late game and can get those resources for themselves. I think Palafox has struggled a bit to be able to take over games in the same way on these AD mid laners as he was on the AP Assassins. It's just something that I think he's not super comfortable with. FBI and Huhi were the strength of this team last year when they were getting into playoffs in terms of being able to carry a lot of games, and it's not really a carry bot meta unless you just actively give resources over, you know, like Berserker was able to get in this game. So I just don't think this meta is particularly good for Energy. I also think that obviously they've not adapted well. Contracts has started just getting back to that flippy mentality that he was known for early on in his career. Palafox is also dying a lot more than he needs to. I think FBI and Huhi definitely have taken a step back in terms of their consistency as a 2v2. A lot of things are going wrong for Energy, but again, sitting at 2-3, just barely below 500 in terms of game score, it's not the worst thing in the world. Their schedule does get harder as they go throughout. Like, it's not an easy end of the split for them, but, you know, if they get one more win, if they're sitting at like 3 wins by the end of the split, honestly, that's probably enough for them to get into playoffs pretty comfortably with how the LCS is going right now. So I'm certainly not panicking for Energy. I think they're going to be fine. They're not going to be a contender, but they're not going to be bottom 2 either, is at least what I would expect. And then for C9, you know, they're competing for top 1. Like, that's really the expectation for this team, and they've done everything, at least up until this point, to kind of prove that they belong in that discussion. And then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and it's probably the biggest upset we've gotten so far in the LCS. It's Shopify Rebellion taking on Dignitas, and Shopify Rebellion is not only going to pick up their first game win, but their first series win of the split. They're going to move to 2-8, and Dignitas, what happened here? How do you lose 0-2 to Shopify Rebellion? Like, how is that even justifiable with the roster talent that you have, with what Shopify has looked like over the course of this split? I want to make it clear, this is the first thing I really want to shout out about Shopify. This is essentially essentially the perfect meta for them when you really think about it. Insanity is the AD carry mid player. Like, he's been playing Graves his entire career. That's kind of his pocket pick. And so to see Zeri and Jhin and, you know, Tristana and Corki and all of these AD carries be super viable in the mid lane, like, this is the meta for Insanity to completely pop off. This is perfectly up his alley. Boogie is one of the best AP junglers that we have in the LCS. That's always kind of been his specialty going back to last year. With the reason that these two clicked so well together on TSM was because of the situation between, you know, their playstyles, is just how well they mesh together. There's just a lot to like about this meta for Shopify. I think it's essentially perfect for them. And obviously Dignitas, not so much. You know, Jensen's not exactly the big AD mid player. Spica can carry on AP carries. It's kind of his thing, but Sven playing weak side, not really his thing. So it's not a great meta for Dig. And these are things that I want to preface this with. But at the same time, even with all that being said, there is no reason for Dignitas to lose this series, let alone lose it 0-2 against a team that is just vastly inferior to them in terms of talent level. So this is not good for Dignitas. This is a really bad loss. And for Shopify, it's a phenomenal win. Get yourself on track. Player of the series is going to go to Insanity. Like I said, this is essentially the perfect meta for him. He can play things like Zeri and Jhin mid, and he's not going to get criticized online for it because he's inting, right? Like, this is what the meta is. This is perfect for Insanity. I'm not expecting this team to completely turn everything around, but I don't know, man. Like, this is a really good sign that perhaps this shift in meta, where now, you know, things like Zeri and Jhin and perhaps Graves can be a little bit more relevant in the mid lane. Like, if that's going to be where we're shifting towards, maybe Shopify can be a lot more relevant as a team moving forward, because Insanity looked awesome here. Jhin is just one of the most broken champions in the game. I get it that Western League of Legends fans love to meme on Jhin and have convinced themselves that Jhin is a bad champion, but as somebody who reviews the LPL and the LCK every single week on this channel, there is simply no reason for me to believe that Jhin is not just one of the most broken champs in the game. We constantly see it completely take over in those regions. The LPL in particular, it's got a ridiculous win percentage. It's constantly destroying the game. And when it really works, like when you're able to actually play around the Jhin in a positive way, there's not a lot the enemy team can actually do to shut down a strong Jhin. So we saw that in Game 2. Insanity just ran things over, but I do want to give a big shout out to Boogie as well in the jungle. Ever since he came back in here for Tomio, this team has leveled up in terms of its consistency. Boogie obviously fits this meta a lot better than Tomio. Tomio much more of a Maokai, Sejuani, like, tank player, and Boogie much more, you know, Brand and Lilia and a lot of these AP carries that are a little bit more, you know, flashy right now, and especially pairing up with someone like Insanity, I think that that playstyle does end up working, and we saw that on both games of Brand. I think Boogie is generally just a lot more consistent and a lot more stable in the jungle in terms of his playstyle, and that's really helped Shopify. But everybody else on this team was good too. B-Boy and Zeyzal were solid down in the bot lane. Sven and Isles were not the problem this series. They certainly were not, you know, the issue. Top lane was a bit of an issue for Dignitas. Fake God was much better in this series. I actually am very interested in the Pantheon in Game 2. I don't think this would work at, like, higher levels, but at the LCS level, where teams are not very good at handling early aggression and trying to stop coordinated plays if they're not expecting it, something like Pantheon could actually work really well in a comp like this. Like, generally, I don't love the draft in Game 2, you know, from a composition perspective, but specifically for Shopify, I think it works really well. And Fake God looked better here than he had in quite a while. He didn't necessarily need to be a focal point, which is good, because he probably shouldn't be for this team with the performances he's given, but he did look solid, and he was better than Licorice on the other side. Just a good showing from Shopify, and boy, did they need it. And then for Dignitas, this is disastrous. I mean, losing to Shopify is about as bad as it gets. They dropped to 4-8 in terms of their game score on the season, 1-4. We were talking about, okay, well, Dig has played, you know, 4 series, and 3 of them were against the 3 top teams in the league: FlyQuest, Team Liquid, Cloud9. I'm not going to indict them too much for being 1-3. They probably should go undefeated for the rest of the split. That was the thinking for Dig, and that's clearly just not going to be the case. They have run into some real struggles here. Dud of the series is going to go to Licorice on the top side. He's been awful for them this split. Quite frankly, his lane stats, his team fighting, it's all bad. Like, it just doesn't look good. I don't know what happened to Licorice to revert him back to, like, the FlyQuest version of him that we're essentially getting, but, you know, it's got to be a confidence thing, because that was what it was before he ended up going to Golden Guardians and getting it back, is that he just was making bad plays and didn't trust himself. But he's losing lane, he's losing team fights, he's not playing proactively. He's just been bad for Dignitas. Nothing else really to say there. Jensen also played really poor here. I just don't know if this is the meta for him. Really, Corki is the only champion that is quote-unquote meta in the mid lane that he has any sort of experience playing, and that's always something that Jensen has really been, you know, not problematic at, but, like, he's not exactly the most flexible flexible player in the entire world, and if the meta is going to shift away from him, that could be a bit of a problem. Spica has been very disappointing in the jungle. This should be a meta where he's able to pop off and gain a lot of leads, and he's just not been able to do that. Sven and Isles have been fine. Isles has certainly had his own problems, but Sven, I think, has been the best player on this team. Continued to not be the problem in this series. He was generally fine in both of these games, but Dignitas, just as a team as a whole, has real problems that they're going to have to deal with. If the solo lanes are going to be out of meta and losing, if jungle is going to be a bit underwhelming, Dignitas is not going to be a team that even remotely tries to compete for a world spot, and I think that was the expectation for them. It really does feel like the Dig experiment is failing at the moment. And then for Shopify, obviously, this is a massive win. It gets your confidence on track, but there is actually reason to believe that this could potentially lead into something more. Like I said, this meta is essentially perfect for these players, and if they're going to be able to capitalize on that more than they've been able to do in previous weeks and in previous splits, that's going to be huge for this team. And then moving on to day number 2 here, and the second half of week number 5, we kick it off with another predictable outcome, FlyQuest taking on 100 Thieves, but this one was a lot closer. FlyQuest is going to pick up the win, but it is in a 2-1 series. 100 Thieves being able to take that game number 1 off of some really good plays on the top side of the map with Sniper was really impressive, and it did show that this team still has some life in them in comparison to maybe some of the other teams that have just kind of completely fallen off over the second half. But at the end of the day, Fly is one of the big 3 right now in the LCS, and that means that 100 Thieves probably just didn't have a huge chance. Their weaknesses are very exploitable in their current state, and we'll talk about why. Hopefully that means, you know, going forward they might be a little bit better, because they did end up making some changes after this series, but you know, at least for now, it didn't end up leading into anything in this series against FlyQuest. But for Fly, they're finding their form. I think this team is honestly a bit underrated in terms of the community right now. It very much feels like a Big 2 discussion rather than a Big 3 discussion. I certainly do think it's a lot more of a Big 3 with Cloud9, Team Liquid, and Fly than it is just like C9 and CL fighting it out for number 1 right now. And that's more of me being high on Fly than it is me being low on the other two. And I think this is another series that ends up proving why I believe that. They're not perfect. They still do have their flaws. Bwipo certainly could have been a bit better earlier on in this series, but they ended up, you know, recovering and stabilizing a bit as we went down the stretch, and this bot lane just continues to look awesome. Masu is going to get player of the series here. He has been exceptional in summer so far. Honestly, he has maybe been the best AD carry in the league so far in summer. It's been really fun to watch. He's been very consistent, and just the difference between the ability to play out comps in spring and summer in terms of what FlyQuest is able to do, it's very noticeable. Masu's improvement has been very clear. We all expected Masu to come in and be really talented, to make a difference, to make an impact early on in his career. I was a huge fan of him in the NACL. It was very clear that he was just kind of a different level of prospect. He was like a Jojo Pune, you know, one of these players that's coming through and it's just like, you can't be in the NACL for long. You are simply too good. You're going to skip through this level and you're going to be a star at the LCS level. You're not just someone who I think could make it at the LCS level. And Masu did, you know, kind of take it slow, I would say, at the start of his LCS tenure. He wasn't perfect at the beginning of the spring split. Really, throughout spring, he had his flaws, and there were times where he did kind of hold his team back in terms of what they were able to accomplish at the top of the standings in general, but he has made that leap over the course of summer split. Hopefully, he's able to keep it up, because at least for now, this bot lane has been very legit. Busio has obviously helped with that quite a bit. Busio's always been a good support. I'm still not blown away by his individual plays. I think he's a very good player, and he's very active on the map, and he's a good laner. He is kind of that jack-of-all-trades type of support that I do think is very valuable in the current meta, because he can play a little bit of everything. He's not a bad enchanter or laner player, and he's really not a bad roamer either. He's just not elite at either of those things, and I think that's the thing that, you know, does concern me a bit with the people talking about him as the clear #1 support in North America. I think that conversation is a lot more interesting than maybe people are giving it credit for at the current moment. So, you know, I like Busio. I don't know if I'm in love with Busio, but Masu is certainly starting to make those developments that, you know, by the end of the year, I could be calling him one of the top 2 AD carries in the LCS, which is really cool. I think Quad was also really good in this series. This might actually be his best series so far in the LCS. He's been pretty good. He's been basically exactly what I expected him to be, which is a good laner and someone that does struggle to translate things into actual macro advantages through the map. That's just what he's always been as a player. As, trust me, as a big DRX fan, you know, going back to 2021, I've watched a lot of Quad individually as a player, and, you know, his biggest weakness has always been his lack of ability to play with his team. He's a very good individual player. Sometimes that doesn't necessarily come out. So far, that's kind of been the case. He's been good in terms of the 1v1s. He's been able to shut down weird off-meta picks and, you know, is not necessarily given over a lot of resources to a lot of the other mid laners that he's playing against, but he could definitely still improve in terms of the overall game impact that he ends up having. Although I think that that's kind of you know, nitpicking just a little bit because he's still performing like an upper tier mid laner at this level, and that's really all you can ask from somebody who would, you know, it's their first split in North America. It's their first year in the region in general. Inspired continues to be one of the best junglers in the league. He gapped River, and it wasn't close. Bwipo, like I said, was really the only concern, but that's because Sniper, I think, played really well today, and Bwipo got better as the series went on. It was just the first game or so that ended up being a bit of a problem for the top side. So FlyQuest definitely still a part of that upper echelon. Are they going to be a team that ends up making finals? I think it's realistic to expect them to do so. I don't know if they're going to. Like, they've been number 3 in my power rankings. They're number 3 in the standings at the moment. You know, Cloud9 and Team Liquid are definitely clicking in a way that FlyQuest just quite hasn't so far this split, but who's to say they can't win a best of 5 against either of those teams? They could be walking out of the LCS as champions this split, and I really wouldn't be all that shocked. And then for 100 Thieves, they kind of are what they are at this point. We know what they are. They are a very known quantity. Their top side is going to be interesting. You know, Sniper, I think, is really starting to get back to that spring form. It's really not been great over summer so far. I think the concern has been that, you know, this team's performances have started to dwindle, and therefore Sniper's performances have started to get worse and worse. In lane, out of lane, all that stuff, but he was awesome in this series. Probably the best series he's had so far in the summer split. River and Quid continue to be both a plus and a minus for this team. Quid is just very predictable in terms of his, you know, play style. He loves these 80 carry mids. He was pulling them out earlier on in the split before people really caught on, and obviously 3 games of Zeri is interesting in concept. I think Zeri mid is very strong. We've seen that in the LCK and the LPL, not just from Chovy, as a lot of people would like to make it out to be. Zeri mid has been very good for a lot of teams, but Quid just didn't play the matchup particularly well, and Quad was better today. River also not playing the way that he did in the spring split. He was an all-pro caliber guy in spring. That's just very much not been the case so far in summer. He's just kind of been another guy on the team. I think the fact that these lanes are losing has definitely impacted him, but really the negative lane is bot lane right now for 100 Thieves. Ayla is going to get my dud of the series here. Just way too passive on things like Nautilus and Rel for my comfort level. Like, if you're going to play these engagers, if you're going to be the kind of player that wants to try and, you know, force the tempo and be the one that, you know, creates the initiation opportunities for your own individual team, you need to be aggressive. You can't be super passive. You can't be scared to go out there and make plays, and Ayla was very scared in this series. It felt like he wasn't confident that his team was going to be able to follow up on any of the plays he actually tried to initiate, and it ended up really costing him, and so he was a pretty easy choice for dud of the series, but Meech has really struggled this split. You know, he was interesting in spring because he was often asked to be this weak side bot laner. He was playing Senna basically the entire split and never really was asked to do all that much, but he was very good in that role. He was really good in the team fighting stage of the game, which was very encouraging for me because that's kind of the opposite of what he was in the NACL in Tier 2, where he was a huge resource carry for basically the entire time. Unfortunately, now that the meta has shifted a bit, and I think bot lanes are getting a bit better in North America, Meech has not really leveled up alongside them and has kind of stayed stagnant, and it's really hurt this team's performances. Update though, he is officially going to be stepping away from 100 Thieves. It seems like it was his decision. If it wasn't, I do feel bad for him. Not that it's not entirely deserved, because it is at least a bit deserved, but Tomo actually was acquired by this team from DSG. This is a no-brainer upgrade for me. Tomo is just straight up a better player than Meech right now. I would have told you that at the beginning of the year when everybody was high on Meech. I was a lot lower on Meech, and I just didn't think he was quite ready to step into a team that wanted to win. Tomo's the kind of player that can step into a team that wants to win right now and actually make a difference, and so I expect that to be better for this bot lane. But if Ayla's going to continue to be very passive for this team, if it's a confidence mentality thing that's just kind of been shaken for him for, you know, how this split has gone down, essentially, that's going to be a problem that persists even with a new AD carry, and you need your jungle mid to start stepping up. Sniper is going to have performances similar to this more consistently. There are things that have to go right for 100 Thieves that are more than just roster changes in order for them to stay relevant, but there is a chance they walk out of this split as the number 4 or 5 team. I think that that's a pretty realistic thing to maybe expect from them. And then for FlyQuest, again, this is a nice win. 4-1 is a really good place. We'll talk about it at the end of the week, but they did qualify for playoffs here. Not that that was ever really in doubt with top 6 qualifying. It's very clear that FlyQuest was going to be in the top 6, but to get that officially out of the way here in week 5, I think is really a positive, and specifically, I think the development of your bot lane and Masu is really the most encouraging thing you can see here. That's what FlyQuest was really banking on at the beginning of the year, and it's kind of coming to fruition now. And then moving on to our final series of the week, and it's another one that, again, no major upset here and kind of a dominating series. It's Team Liquid taking on Immortals, and Team Liquid is going to pick up the win here 2-0. Game 1 was a demolition. Game 2, a little bit closer, if only because Immortals actually had some interesting things to do in the late game, but their wallets were just a tad bit too far behind, and they couldn't quite catch up in terms of the decisions. It didn't matter if they were making good plays and good flanks. Team Liquid was simply too far ahead by the time we hit the late game, and this is just another pretty typical typical Team Liquid win. They have looked pretty untouchable over the course of this split. They've looked a little bit beatable in terms of like individual games. You know, they've lost 2 games. That's one more than Cloud9, I guess, over the course of this split. But I would argue that in terms of series as a whole, they've felt a lot more consistent. And I continue to say that Team Liquid is by far the highest floor team in the LCS. There really isn't a lot of reason for me to believe that they could ever just completely fall out from under themselves and not be useful at any point anymore. I don't think Team Liquid won't make finals. Like, I feel pretty confident that, you know, one of FlyQuest and Cloud9 is probably missing finals. I don't know which one will end up underperforming, but, you know, I'm not guaranteeing that Team Liquid will end up winning the finals, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? I just don't really see a world in which they underperform to that degree, and they continue to show that. Player of the series is going to go to Impact. There's a really strong argument that Impact is, like, running away with the MVP conversation so far in the summer split. He really has been that good for Team Liquid. I think his teammate APA is very much also in that conversation, but Impact is kind of the one that's standing out for a lot of people. That Kennen game in game number 2 was unbelievably good. Castle tried some interesting things on the Gnar. I'm certainly not going to put this on Castle. I really respect that even in a really bad state, he was constantly still looking for plays, and, you know, that's what you want to see out of players on teams that aren't necessarily performing well, but Impact was just straight up better across the series, and it was really fun to watch. Like I said, specifically that Kennen in game number 2 was absolutely brutal to try and play into. It dominated lane, was incredibly oppressive out of lane. Those ultimates were phenomenal, so Impact just continues to look great. And then APA, I really want to shout him out. He is so good on Tristana. Like, he is the best Tristana in North America, and it's not even really particularly close at the current moment. There are concerns with whether or not he's as comfortable on some other marksmen. The Lucian, for example, did not look quite as good in game number 2, although it certainly didn't look bad. It just didn't look quite as good as the Tristana, but APA is also up there for the MVP conversation for me with how well he has been playing. Playing things like Ivern and Maokai is exactly what you want to see. I was really worried that Team Liquid would buy into whatever is going on in North America right now, that tank junglers are actually bad, and that you can only play Lilia and Zyra and Brand and things like that to try and win games. That's very much not the case, and Team Liquid has always played better, and in particular has always played better when he's on tanks and when he's able to be a facilitator. That has continued to be the case. Yon and Core are the best bot lane in North America. They're certainly the most consistent bot lane in North America, and they brutalized Tactical and Ole. This was just a dominating win for TL. The solo lanes are definitely the standout players for me right now, which is really good because it was the bot lane that was doing all of the heavy lifting in spring, and now it very much feels like a more, you know, team effort type of performance from TL, but hopefully they can keep it up. I really do think that, you know, everybody calling this team the #1 team in NA has certainly put a lot of expectation on them, so next week is certainly going to be very interesting. But for Immortals, they're just not good. Like, you know, with Shopify winning this week, honestly, it doesn't put Immortals in that great of a spot, especially because I think Shopify is much better for this meta than Immortals is at the current moment, and Immortals might have the worst player in the LCS. Armeo is once again going to get dud of the series. He's gotten quite a few of these over the course of this split already. They are 1-4. He's gotten dud of the series in 3 of their 4 losses. He's just not really playing well at the moment. Again, I'm going to stick to my take because I still continue to think that it's accurate. I think if Armeo was on a better team, he would look significantly better. I think he's the type of player that really relies on winning lanes in order to really be proactive on the map, but when his lanes are losing, when his team isn't in good positions in the early game, he looks horrendous. He's going to underperform in that situation more than your average jungler would, and so it's just an unfortunate place to be. His team isn't very good, and it's making him look worse, but he's also kind of compounding the issue himself with this playstyle. It's just not a good look. I don't think AP junglers are what this team should be going for right now. It's certainly not a good idea to try to play through him because his early games just aren't very consistent. I also want to point out, though, one player that's just not getting the kind of pushback that I would expect considering their play is Ole. I continue to see people be like, well, Ole is actually a big positive for this team. Like, Tactical and Ole actually do really well in lane, and you can talk about them being the strength, quote-unquote, of Immortals. I don't see that. Like, if you can point that out to me on film, I'd love to understand that, but go watch this team's laning phase. Tactical is, like, positioning really well, and there are a lot of really good plays, and generally speaking, he's also positioning poorly, and he's also got a lot of bad plays. It's just kind of what you have to live with when it comes to Tactical, but Ole is, like, not doing anything in these laning phases. He's not doing anything outside of these laning phases. I think he's been the worst support in the LCS this year, and so I don't really know what people are seeing in him. People continue to hype him up. My theory is that people really like his personality, that he's a very likable player, and that's just like translating into everyone wanting him to be good, and Tactical has had some good performances, so the bot lane in general must be positive, but I just don't see it on tape with Ole. I think he is pretty consistently over the past like 3 or 4 years, like basically every opportunity he's gotten since Team Liquid, been maybe the worst support in the LCS. And so I'm pretty much out on him individually as a player. You know, Mask has some interesting tendencies, but he's very passive. Castle is the opposite, very aggressive, is willing to go for a lot of plays, but not all of them are the best plays. Tactical, I think, is overrated, but in the general sense of I think he's fine. I don't think he's great. I don't think he would look amazing on a great team. I think he looks good, you know, on a bad team because he gets all the resources. And so I don't really know how to feel about Immortals. I'm really not high on this team. I've never been high on this team. They might not even be the 7th best team. They might be the worst team in the LCS right now. And then for Liquid, you know, again, we already talked about it. 5-0 is looking really good. You're still not in first place because you've had a couple of game losses in series that Cloud9 just hasn't picked up, but you will have the chance to steal that first place away next week. Those two teams finally get to go head-to-head in week number 6. I'm really excited to see where things end up going for Team Liquid and for, you know, Cloud9 in that matchup because there's a lot that can happen, but right now, TL is definitely going to be the favorites for a reason. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCS week number 5 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen, the updated standings after 5 weeks of action. We very much got a divide between the top 3 and everyone else who's honestly all fighting out for those top 6 spots. Only 2 teams don't make the playoffs here. Everyone is still in contention to end up making this. Last place is 1 game out of the playoffs right now, which is absurd to end up saying, but that's just how we've ended up moving along in the LCS this year. You can see a green border surrounding the top 3. That means all 3 of them have officially qualified for the playoffs. There is no way that they can drop out. Not that that was really ever in doubt for any of them. Cloud9, Team Liquid, FlyQuest, they all look great. But in each column, you can see quite a few things. Power rank is how I personally power rank these teams from number 1 to number 8. Change is how they have changed from last week to this week. Again, not a lot of changes. I just feel very hesitant to make a lot of changes when nobody's really solidified themselves. I mean, the top 3 are all very good. Right now, Cloud9 has not proven that they deserve to be down from the number 1 spot. They were number 1 in my preseason rankings, and they've stayed there ever since. If Team Liquid wins next week, they'll be number 1. If Cloud9 wins next week, they'll be number 1. It really is as simple as that, unless something crazy happens and for some reason I walk out of the series being like, actually the losing team was better. That's happened before, and so, you know, we'll see, obviously, but for the most part, whoever wins next week is going to be the number 1 team in the LCS and probably will be the number 1 seed coming out of the regular season. But I didn't make any changes in the middle of the standings. I think that might surprise some people. Dig will stay at 4. I don't feel good about that right now, but like, do I really think 100 Thieves or Energy are better than them? I don't. Like, I don't know if they are. Perhaps Tomo coming in is going to make 100 Thieves a little bit more consistent. I think that is definitely a possibility, and if that happens next week, then I'm happy to move them up to number 4, and I'm happy to talk about them in that regard, but I just haven't seen it yet, and so it's hard for me to just, like, project them to be that, but I certainly don't feel like Energy are better than Dignitas, even with the better record at the current moment, so not making any changes in the middle of the pack, but I am making a change at the bottom of the standing. Shopify is going to leap Immortals. This feels crazy. They just won their first game of the split. Why would they move out of last place? It's not like this team has been consistent at all. Like I said, I'm taking a bit of a risk here, but I think Immortals is garbage. I think that they are truly awful, and I do not expect them to be relevant at all for the rest of the split. And Shopify, at the very least, I think fits this meta incredibly well, where I think AD carries in the mid lane really work for Insanity, and I think Boogie coming back in has really reignited some of the plays that this team has wanted to make, and generally, I think they'll be more competitive than Immortals down the stretch, even if I also don't think they are going to win a series down the stretch. I think both teams end probably with 1 win across the rest of this split, but we will end up seeing, won't we? Let me know if you agree or disagree with my power rankings. I know you guys continue to disagree with Team Liquid being at 2 and Cloud9 being at 1, but outside of that, let me know if you agree or disagree with anything else, and it's time to move in to my Player of the Week and my Dud of the Week, and this one was pretty simple, at least for me. Player of the Week is going to go to Masu. He just absolutely torched the 100 Thieves bot lane. We will get into that with the Dud of the Week in just a second, but Masu has really kind of emerged as a star in the LCS. I still think he has a ways to go before like really locking in his spot near the top of the AD carry rankings. There are quite a few ADCs that are playing really well at the current moment, but Masu is definitely one of them, and we expected him to come in and be a top 3, top 4 AD carry year 1, and that wasn't necessarily the case for me at the very least in the spring split. It very much is the case so far in summer. That's a really good sign. My honorable mentions: Impact, the top laner for Team Liquid. He continues to be awesome. Again, probably leading the MVP race right now, and then Berserker, the AD carry for Cloud9. That C9 bot lane has really started to lock in. Vulcan getting Player of the Week last week, Berserker being an honorable mention this week. Just a lot of good things for Cloud9 in terms of the bot lane. Them stepping up is probably the key to success for them moving forward. If they're going to be consistent and if they're going to be able to play off each other and do well in the early game, then I think they're going to be just fine. If that bot lane continues to really struggle, I think that the other really good teams like FlyQuest and Team Liquid could potentially take advantage of that. So Berserker, a big turning point for Cloud9. He's going to get an honorable mention this week alongside Impact, but Masu will be my player of the week. And then my dud of the week is going to go to Ayla, the support for 100 Thieves. Their bot lane is just an absolute disaster at the current moment. There were a lot of good candidates for dud of the week, but Ayla was definitely the one that stood out for me. I just can't justify how they played across all 3 of those games. Ayla is so passive. He feels so scared at the current moment to go out and try things because they've lost so much over the past few weeks. Tomo coming in might fix that. He might be, this really aggressive shot in the arm that this team needs. He's been that before for a previous team in Dignitas when they ended up making playoffs because of Tomo, and, obviously was really good in lane last split. He's been tearing up the NACL. There was a real shot that he comes in and really reignites this bot lane. However, if Ayla continues to be very passive, that change might not even end up mattering in the end because the 2v2 might not end up changing all that much. And so we'll end up seeing, but at least for now, I have to give Ayla dud of the week, and I have to give Masu player of the week here for week 5, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LCS. We post about all 4 of the major regions, the LEC, LCK, LPL. We put out a ton of LPL content this week. Their playoffs are starting very soon. LEC season finals are starting very soon. LCK is really getting into the swing of things. We also cover the NACL here in North America, Tier 2. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.